Hi there, this is Mrs. Meek, and I wanted to go ahead and review these notes with you on photosynthesis. Please make sure you're taking handwritten notes. You may need to pause the video as you work to get all the important details. As always, I recommend students use the Cornell note-taking system that we discussed earlier this year. All right, so autotrophs and heterotrophs. We're going to review the difference between these two roles before we get into photosynthesis. So all life on Earth depends on this flow of energy through the ecosystem between autotrophs and heterotrophs. Ultimately, the source of this energy is the sun. All right, so to refresh your memory, autotrophs are organisms that can make their own food. These organisms use the light energy from the sun to produce food in the form of glucose, or what we call sugar. All right, these include all green plants, some bacteria, and some protists. So bacteria, remember, are single-celled prokaryotic cells that are pretty basic, but if they have chloroplast in them, they can undergo photosynthesis. All right, heterotrophs are organisms that must consume their food. So they have to eat other living things or previously living things. All right, so they eat other plants, they eat other animals. They cannot make their own food using the energy from the sun. Examples include animals, which is us, and all fungi. All right, so energy enters the ecosystem in the form of sunlight. Plants use the sun's energy to make glucose. This energy is stored in a molecule of glucose. It's stored in the chemical bonds in the sugar molecule. And the energy moves up the food chain when a consumer eats the plant. All right, photosynthesis is converting radiant energy from the sun into chemical energy in the form of glucose. All right, so before we move into photosynthesis, we need to talk for just a minute about what kinds of chemical energy are active in cells. All right, so energy can be stored in chemical compounds, and one of the principal chemical compounds that cells use to store and release energy is ADP and ATP. So this is like a battery. All right, ADP is energy poor. So it's kind of like the battery hasn't been charged up. ATP is a version of this molecule that is more energy rich. So it's like a charged up battery. All right, so ATP is made up of three main components. It consists of an adenine, a ribose sugar, and three phosphates. All right, so ATP stands for adenosine triphosphate, and that's because we've got three phosphate groups here. Energy is stored in these bonds. All right, so there's a phosphate bond here, a phosphate bond here. All right, so when your cells need energy, they break those bonds in order to release the chemical energy. All right, so ADP is a compound that looks very much like ATP, except for it only has two phosphates. So it stands for adenosine diphosphate, all right? So there's only two. So energy is added by bonding on this extra phosphate group, all right? So the exchange from ADP to ATP means that energy has been added to the molecule. Also, the phosphate has been added. So when we add that bond, it requires energy. When we need energy in the cell, we'll break this bond, and that energy can be harnessed by the cell to carry out life processes. When a cell has energy available, it can store small amounts by adding that phosphate group to the ADP. All right, so adding phosphate forms the molecule ATP, and the addition of the third phosphate group is where we're able to store the energy. All right, when a cell needs energy, the phosphate group will be removed and energy will be released. All right, so there's this constant exchange of energy. Once it's used, then it's got to be powered up. The energy for powering up this molecule comes from sugars, the glucose. ATP has enough energy stored in the molecule to power things like photosynthesis, protein synthesis, so the making of enzymes, the making of muscles, muscle contraction, active transport, so moving particles across the cell membrane. So the ATP molecule is the basic energy source of all living cells. So ATP is used continuously. It must be regenerated continuously, so it must be charged. In a working cell, 10 million ATP are consumed and regenerated every single second. That's 10 million of these little molecules. All right, so your cells really do have a lot of them, and it's that chemical, the breaking of that chemical bond that releases the energy. All right, so photosynthesis. Photosynthesis occurs in plants, and they use the energy of the sun to convert water and carbon dioxide into high energy sugar molecules. So what's going into the system is sunlight, water, and carbon dioxide. What's coming out is sugar and oxygen. So oxygen is a waste product that's given off, all right, and that is something that we animals use in order to undergo cellular respiration, which we'll talk about next week. So life on Earth is dependent on photosynthesis for the food, which is the sugar, and the oxygen. If we did not have autotrophs, we could not exist. All right, so the photosynthesis equation, you need to write this down. It's 6CO2, which is carbon dioxide, plus 6H2O, which you should know is water. There should be a yield sign here, like this, an arrow. I don't know what happened to it in this slide. And it yields C6H12O6. This is the equation for glucose, or sugar, plus 6O2, which is oxygen. All right, so please make sure you write this formula down. Notice this formula is balanced. If we have 6 carbons on this side of the formula, we also have 6 carbons on the other side of the formula. All right, so formulas must stay balanced. Photosynthesis uses the energy of sunlight to convert water, all right, and carbon dioxide into high energy sugars and oxygen. All right, so the inputs, what's going in? Carbon dioxide, water, sunlight. What's coming out? Sugar and oxygen. So the carbon dioxide is found in the atmosphere and it is taken in by the leaves, whereas the water comes up from the ground and it's absorbed by the roots of the plant. All right, so this is just a little schematic that is showing how everything comes in and goes out. So sunlight comes in, carbon dioxide comes in, water comes in through the roots. Oxygen is given out through the leaves, and sugars are stored in the plant. And when another living organism eats that plant, they are able to break down those sugars. All right, so leaves are the major organ of photosynthesis. That is why they are green, and that's why they are flat. They are designed to be little solar collectors. All right, there are about 500,000 chloroplasts per square millimeter of leaf surface. All right, so a millimeter is like the thickness of a paperclip, the thickness, not how wide, all right, but the thickness of that wire. That's a millimeter, all right, and for each square millimeter, we're talking 500,000 chloroplasts. They are jam-packed in those cells. All right, just to review, animal cells do not have chloroplasts. They are only found in plant cells. All right, plant cells are the only cells other than bacteria, some bacteria, that have chloroplasts. All right, so the structure of the chloroplast is really, really important in order to carry out photosynthesis. So the chloroplast has a double membrane separated by space between the two membranes. Inside our chloroplast are what we call these thylakoids. All right, that is these individual little discs. All right, they look like little dimes, and a stack of these is called a grana. All right, so thylakoids are stacked inside the chloroplasts, and a stack of these is called grana. The thylakoids are what contain the chlorophyll, the pigment that is used to capture the energy from the sun. All right, surrounding the thylakoids is a dense solution, kind of like cytoplasm, and it's called the stroma. All right, so there's like a jelly type liquidy a liquid gel surrounding these grana, these thylakoids, and that's the stroma. All right, so the two most important parts of the chloroplast that you need to know are the thylakoids and the stroma. That is because there are two main phases of photosynthesis. There's what we call the light-dependent reactions and the light-independent reactions. So the light-dependent reactions take place in that thylakoid, all right, and that little dime-like structure. So if we go back, that little dime-like structure is the thylakoid. That is where the light-dependent reactions take place. The light-independent reactions take place in the stroma, in that liquid jelly-like area. All right, so that surrounds all of those thylakoids. All right, we're not going to go into the detail of each of these, but I want to just show you this diagram. All right, so you should be able to study this diagram and understand certain parts. So over here on this side, so this whole thing here is showing one chloroplast. All right, so it's a blown up version of one chloroplast. Water comes in to the chloroplast, light from the sun, all right, and it hits these thylakoids, each of these little dime-like structures. All right, it makes the molecules in there very excited, and chemical reactions can occur. All right, we charge up our ATP molecule. That ATP molecule moves into the second part of the cycle, the light-independent reactions, which we sometimes call the Calvin cycle. Carbon dioxide comes in here. This occurs in the stroma and that jelly-like substance, and glucose is released. All right, so there's like this cycle that continues. We use ATP that was charged up from the sun. All right, and then it has to be recycled. So ADP returns back to the light-dependent reactions. All right, we're not going to worry about NADPH. That's going into a lot more detail. All right, but it's another energy-carrying molecule. So in the light-dependent reactions, water and sunlight come into the thylakoid and they charge up ATP. Oxygen is also released at this time. This ATP molecule moves to the Calvin cycle, which is also called the light-independent reactions. Carbon dioxide also comes in, and this is where we form our glucose or sugar molecule. All right, so this diagram is really important. Please make sure you include it in your notes. Make sure you include all the labels. All right, so remember, the whole point of photosynthesis is to make glucose. Why is glucose important? Well, the plant uses it as food. It's broken down in cellular respiration, and it's used as food for the plant. They use it to make cell walls. They use it to store starches so they can eat it later. All right, and it's important for us because we typically eat plants or other things that eat plants. All right, so there are factors that can affect the rate of photosynthesis. So any of the inputs, water is required. So if there's not enough water in the roots of the plant, the water, that can slow down photosynthesis. In some cases, it can even stop photosynthesis. So in order to prevent water loss from the plant, they have a waxy cuticle. All right, so they have adaptations that allow them to be successful in different environments. Other factors that can affect the rate of photosynthesis are things like temperature. Plants have a temperature range in which the enzymes in their body work best. So very low or very high temperatures, depending on the plant, can make photosynthesis slow down, speed up, or stop completely. The amount of light. All right, some plants require lots of light. Other plants require low levels of light. All right, so depending on the environment, light intensity can increase or decrease the rate of photosynthesis. All right, to sum up all this information, the energy from the sun has been stored in a chemical energy in the molecule of glucose. All right, so essentially we're taking radiant energy from the sun, turning it into chemical energy in the form of glucose or sugar. All right, you guys, please make sure you've got all your notes. All right, so please make sure you took all your notes today. You're going to want to use these to study. Make sure you've got good details. Have a great day.